1946 AD, 58:40 AM. The League of Nations is formally dissolved and the United Nations begins its first year. Zionist terrorists bomb the British Palestine Army Command at the King David Hotel in Jerusalem. Civil war breaks out in China between communists and nationalists. The Nuremberg trial ends with the execution of 12 Nazi leaders and 5 sentenced to life in prison. John D. Rockefeller donated $8.5 million for the United Nations headquarters to be built in New York City. The Soviet Union takes 5 million Germans back to Russia, 4 million being civilians, mostly women and children. These people are detained in Soviet labor camps and starved to death. These people were filmed on old black and white reels, and the films were later circulated as evidence that the Nazis starved the Jews. None of these 5 million survived or were heard from again. President Truman and other American officials were aware of the Russian genocidal campaigns and slave labour but covered it up. These events never received attention in the media. The two economic power centres of the Western world are also the two mostly influenced by the international Jewish banking and media giants. These are London and New York. In London, the First General Assembly of the United Nations convened, and they voted to seat their headquarters in New York. The US detonated a subsurface atomic weapon at Bikini Atoll. The first man-made contact with the moon was conducted when radar signals emitted from Earth were bounced back from the moon. A polio epidemic breaks out in the US. 1. 20th century events. 3. Iron Curtain over America. 1947 AD, 58:41 AM. The Dead Sea Scrolls are discovered in a cave at Qumran near the Dead Sea. These texts are about 2,000 years old concerning the sons of light and the sons of darkness, Anunnaki. In the War Scroll it explains the Great War of Armageddon, when humans and angelic beings will fight side by side. This is the same year as the Roswell incident involving a crashed UFO in New Mexico, which brought the world's attention to Hangar 18 of Area 51. Many researchers theorize that extraterrestrials have given the US military alien technologies, and if this is true, then it mirrors what the ancient records claim occurred before the flood, starting in 3439 BC, when the Watchers, Anunnaki, descended to Earth and gave humans technologies and knowledge in exchange for human females. Found among the Dead Sea texts was the Testament of Amram, which contains references to shape-changing reptilian beings known as Watchers. These dark entities can assume the faces of adders. Pilot Kenneth Arnold witnessed a clearly visible UFO near Mount Rainier in Washington on June 24th. This still remains one of the most celebrated UFO sightings. At Death Valley in the USA were discovered human skeletons that had stood 9 feet in height. President Truman sets up the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, in July by National Security Act. However, the CIA had its origin with the CIG, Central Intelligence Group, and Office of Strategic Services, which Truman enacted originally to investigate the UFO and extraterrestrial presence. American pilot Chuck Yeager broke the sound barrier, Mach 1, in a Bell X-1 rocket-powered airplane. India is partitioned and then becomes separate countries, enemies India and Pakistan, one Hindu and the other Muslim. Malaria kills over 1 million people in India. British women and children are evacuated from Palestine as they come under attacks from Jewish terrorists. The United Nations votes to partition Palestine, setting up a Jewish state. Fighting between Arabs and Jews erupts. That this is one of the very first acts of the United Nations is very telling. 1. Lost Cities and Ancient Mysteries of North America. 2. Behold a Pale Horse. 3. 20th Century Events. 1948 AD, 58:42 AM. On May 14th, the modern State of Israel began by British mandate amidst an enraged Arab world. The Arab League nations attack after the Jewish takeover of Palestine, where 75% of the local Muslims and Christians were forced out of the country, into camps or into neighbouring nations. this being about 630,000 people. The Israeli takeover was prophesied in the scriptures by Jeremiah the prophet. Quote, "In those days the house of Judah shall walk with the house of Israel, and they shall come together out of the land of the north, to the land that I have given for an inheritance unto thy fathers." Unquote. This prophecy is precise, for the Russian military aided greatly in the Jewish takeover of Palestine, the Russians being the, quote, land of the north, unquote, and being descendants of the house of Israel. The Arabs were defeated by the Jewish-Russian troops, this being known ever after as the Israeli Independence War. The Anno Domini year of 1948 parallels the 1948 Annus Mundi year, 1947 BC, when the patriarch Abraham was born. Israel was established 1335 weeks, 25 years, after 1922, when the Balfour Declaration concerning Palestine was made. The re-establishment of national Israel is the first time in history any people were ever obliterated, spread among the nations of the world, their cities burned to the ground and left abandoned, and their peoples millennia later reassembling to rebuild their nation. Hebrew had become extinct as a national language, and supplemented with Yiddish and other variants, but with the re-establishment of Israel, Hebrew as a language was the first spoken language of any people in the world to resurrect. The return of Hebrew was prophesied by the prophet Zephaniah. Strengthened by the Soviet presence and connections, the new Israelis begin building their nation as Jews from Russia. The Eastern Bloc nations of Europe and America flood the country. An estimated 880,000 Palestinian Christians and Muslims were driven out by the end of the year. The United States participated through small special forces units that quietly withdrew after the areas were secured. The signature of Ireland's ancient Judahite pedigree can be seen in that in 1948, the Republic of Ireland was founded, becoming a sovereign nation independent of Britain. Much of this Judahite evidence is in CHRONICON 1. Chinese dictator Mao Zedong, after implementing strict gun control policies, rounded up 20 million political dissidents on through 1952 and systematically exterminated them. In the US, a top-secret document of the Air Technical Intelligence Center, addressed to the USAF Chief of Staff, concluded that UFOs were interplanetary spaceships. 1. Jewish supremacism. 2. Jeremiah. 3. Cosmic codes. 4. Iron Curtain over America. 6. Synagogue of Satan. 7. Dark Moon.